The title of this is The Effect of Time-Equated Concurrent Training Programs in Resistance-Trained Men. All concurrent training is just combining elements of resistance training with elements of conditioning or cardio or aerobic training.
Okay.
So it's one program with those things in it. And so for those of you who actually listen to what we have to say in regards to exercise, that is what the exercise guidelines are a proponent of. That's pretty much what everybody is a proponent of anyway, is some sort of concurrent training. Certainly one of these facets is always better than none. But it's the integration of these two that often draws some critiques, some different thoughts, maybe some issues for people, some confusion. And so this study aimed to look at, if we looked at different types of concurrent training, how did this affect their performance across the different domains that they're talking about?
Sure.
So they broke it into 4 groups. And so there was a resistance training only group, 3 days a week. There was a resistance training plus cycling group, 3 days a week of resistance, 2 days a week of 30 minutes of cycling.
Okay.
And you'll see these groups keep building upon each other. The resistance training, the next group is resistance training plus high intensity interval cycling.
Oh, okay.
Final group was resistance training plus circuit resistance training. And so what that is, to kind of distinguish it from the high intensity group, they essentially, the exercises that they did the resistance training portion with, it was a bench press, shoulder press, squat, barbell curl, certain very, fundamental movements.
Yeah.
They did that in their specific, they did the same resistance training days as all the conditioning people, but then they took those same exercises and they just put them in a 30-minute time cap and said, you have to do those 4 or 5 exercises straight through for X amount of reps and get as many as you can in the allotted window.
So they turned it into CrossFit.
They turned it into it sounds CrossFit-ish, yes.
Is that, it sounds exactly like what that is, isn't it?
Exactly. So let's go back and look at some of the results. I want to present these in the simplest way possible.
Okay.
So in general, if we look at just the cardiovascular outcomes that we mentioned, so these are things like VO2 peak or the max wattage that they were able to put out on the given cyclical device. So only the moderate intensity group, so like the 30 minutes of cycling continuously group and the high intensity cycling group, those were the only groups that really saw a meaningful improvement in either of those measures.
No kidding.
Yes. And so it's important, I think, in that context to note that's ultimately why we advocate for kind of trying to keep, as you're getting started or you're just trying to hit a catch-all approach to exercise. That's why we advocate leave the resistance training as the resistance training. And if you can, and you can work it in, try to leave your cardiovascular exercise as your cardiovascular exercise. And that's walking, biking, cycling, running, swimming, rowing, all of those sorts of, we call them monostructural or cyclical modalities, things that you can do continuously.
Right.
And it's harder. There's a whole separate conversation in and of itself of why it would be harder for just doing bench press, squat, barbell curls, like in a higher intensity setting, why that doesn't quite lend itself as well to those cardiovascular outcomes. You just can't quite elicit the same. You're limited by the muscular endurance component of those exercises.
Absolutely.
That don't let you, whereas you can push those other characteristics on the cyclical modalities.
Yeah. If you do a back squat of substantial weight for 10 reps, you're probably out of breath by the time you quit doing it, even though it's theoretically not a cardiovascular exercise. It just, the way it works, it drains your breath.
Exactly.
I can't imagine trying to do that in a timed fashion and thinking that that's going to be cardiovascular exercise.
Exactly. They also stated that the data suggested that the interference effect on maximal strength and hypertrophy can be avoided when the aerobic training is moderate intensity cycling, high intensity cycling or novel barbell circuit for 1 hour per week and on non-resistance training days. So that's
okay. So
that's a lot, but that's like, that pretty much captures what the heck I really care about with this whole thing.
So the interference effect, are you talking about, I think I've heard that, that doing cardiovascular exercise can interfere with hypertrophic benefit of lifting weights, that you won't gain as much mass or get as strong if you're also doing cardio at the same time.
Exactly.
Is that what we're talking about?
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because I really wanted that concept to be the bulk of this discussion.
Yeah.
Because as you can see, sometimes it's a little dry just running through the statistics of a trial, as important as I think that is.
Yeah.
It's these big concepts that stand out. And so the interference effect is something that, dates all the way back to the 80s, and for good reason. In some studies that were looking specifically at athletes, so strength athletes, let's say, as they were focused on their resistance training, once they started pouring in these extra bouts of conditioning and running and sprints, they noticed sort of this drop off in their ability to maintain or increase their strength, maintain or increase their power.
Yeah.
Characteristics that are really important for the athletic population. And so that thinking was pervasive through today, arguably, but to a much lesser extent. And that's what papers like this set out to try and, help try to expand upon. And so ultimately, yes, that what you said is the interference effect.
Okay. And this paper is saying that that's not a factor.
Yes. They're saying that you can still absolutely get stronger and you can get bigger, talking about hypertrophy, with a little bit of aerobic training in your overall plan.